from Beshenkowitsky to beyond Vitebsk. We were always in bivouac or under canvas. The emperor was so anxious for a battle that he drove the army forward with all his energy and all the brilliance of his genius. The Battle of Ostrovno, July 26th, after Beshenkowitsky, was quite costly but sufficiently advantageous. It was nevertheless only a rearguard attack in which the enemy really obtained the result he desired, for he hindered our movement, forced us to make fresh dispositions, and in consequence delayed us several hours. The army again began to advance, and on the morrow we found ourselves in the presence of the enemy, who was occupying the heights crowning the great plateau in front of Vitebsk. The emperor was on horseback before daybreak, July 27th, and the reconnaissances pushed as far as the Luchieza River, found a strong body of enemy cavalry in position. Our infantry arrived. 2 regiments had already crossed the bridge, but were waiting on a plateau, a little in advance and to the right, until the artillery and the remainder of the cavalry should join them. The enemy deployed considerable masses of cavalry, which bore down on the weak regiments of light troops that composed our advance guard, who were formed in 2 lines, to the left of the road and in front of the gully. Our cavalry regiments reached them, but could not form up quickly enough to make headway against the masses of men already engaged with our advance guard, over which the enemy gained at the outset in easy success. During this time, a company of light infantry, detached from our left to support the small force of our cavalry, proved what the resolution of this admirable branch of infantry can do, even when it is cut off. Placed along the stream and in some bushes and houses in front of the gully, these brave fellows were surrounded by a cloud of cavalry against which they fired at will in support of our feeble squadrons. They kept up continuous fire and emptied many saddles among the enemy, doing such damage that by degrees they forced him off the flank of our squadrons, which would have been seriously threatened from the onset of the attack had it not been for this valuable help. Several times we saw 5 or 6 of these light infantrymen assemble some 50 paces from the enemy's squadrons, when a knot of horsemen was bearing down on them, and stand back to back, holding their fire and waiting till they had them at point-blank range. They even took some prisoners. This company played a great part in the events of the day. The emperor said to several of them, who brought him prisoners and asked for the cross, "You are all brave lads, and you all deserve it." The day was spent in maneuvering, bombarding, and minor attacks to test and adjust our respective positions in preparation for the great battle for which the emperor and the majority of the French were hoping on the morrow. The emperor was cheerful and already beaming with pride, so confident was he of measuring his strength with the enemy and obtaining a result that should give some color to his expedition, already too far flung. He spent the day in the saddle, reconnoitered the terrain in every direction, even at a considerable distance, and returned to his tent very late, having actually seen and checked everything for himself. It is impossible to give any idea of the general disappointment, especially the emperor's disappointment, when at daybreak, July 28th, the certainty was borne in upon us that the Russian army had vanished and abandoned Vitebsk. Not a soul was to be found, not even a peasant who could indicate the direction taken by the enemy, for he had not passed through the town. For some hours we had to act like huntsmen and follow up in every direction the track he had taken. What was the use? What route had his masses of men and artillery followed? No one knew, and for some hours no one could know, for there were no signs of them on all sides. Moreover, the emperor at first only sent out his advance guards. He passed rapidly through the streets and outside the town, and then rejoined his guard, which, like the rest of the troops, was already on the march along the road to Smolensk. The troops were constantly harassed. Many of the horses were unable to stand up through the charges the vanguard made, and so their riders were lost. The emperor bivouacked at Lukasna with the guard and remained there through part of the following day, July 29th, waiting for news. But there were no inhabitants to be found, no prisoners to be taken, not a single straggler to be picked up. There were no spies. We were in the heart of inhabited Russia. And yet, if I may be permitted the comparison, we were like a vessel without a compass, in the midst of a vast ocean, knowing nothing of what was happening around us. At last it was learned from two peasants who were caught that the Russian army was far ahead of us and that it had been on the move for 4 days. For perhaps more than an hour, the emperor remained undecided. Perhaps the Russians want to give battle at Smolensk, he said. Bagration has not joined up with them. We must attack them. At last he decided to give the army a much-needed rest. Part of the cavalry was already worn out. The artillery and the infantry were exhausted. The roads were covered with stragglers who destroyed it and wasted everything. It was essential to organize our rear and await the result of the operations undertaken by the corps that had remained on the Dwina. The certainty that the Russian army was going to escape him and that he would not for some time obtain the battle he desired so keenly cast the emperor into a deep gloom. Eventually, July 29th, he resigned himself to the necessity of returning to Vitebsk. As I have said, our cavalry and artillery have already suffered severely. A very large number of horses had died. Many were lagging behind, wasting away, wandering at the rear. Others followed their corps, to whom they were but a useless embarrassment. The King of Naples was better able to appreciate these troubles than anyone, and he told the rest of us about them when he chatted with us. He even ventured to make some remarks to this effect to the emperor, but His Majesty did not care for reflections that ran counter to his projects and lent a deaf ear. He changed the subject, and the King of Naples, who above all wished to please him, and who flattered his own vanity at the same time by so doing, kept to himself the wise reflections which he had voiced to us alone. He soon forgot them entirely. Always at the forefront of the skirmishes and eager to thrust his ostrich plumes and fantastic uniform beneath the very noses of the Cossacks, he succeeded in ruining the cavalry, ended by causing the loss of the army, and brought France and the emperor to the brink of an abyss. One day, however, General Belliard, chief of staff to the King of Naples, observed in his presence to the emperor, who was questioning him, "Your Majesty must be told the truth. The cavalry is rapidly disappearing. The marches are too long and exhausting, and when a charge is ordered, you can see willing fellows who are forced to stay behind because their horses can't be put to the gallop." The emperor paid no attention to these prudent observations. He wanted to reach his prey, and in his view, it was evidently worth paying any price to obtain that object, for he sacrificed everything to gain it. While these events befell the Grand Army, the King of Westphalia was detached for the support of the Prince of Eckmuhl's corps. Jerome had let his troop pillage the Duchy of Warsaw, of which he flattered himself he was the ruler, and had driven that loyal country into discontent. Like a good many other people, he imagined that Poland had been awarded to him. This Poland, which the emperor wished to revive and make into a buffer state. Accordingly, the King of Westphalia thought it beneath his dignity to serve under the victor of Auerstedt and Eckmühl, so he left the army, July 16th, and returned to Kassel with his guard. Such was the support given to the emperor in sore straits by the brothers whom he had made kings. According to the emperor, the king was the cause of the Prince of Eckmühl's failure to carry out his operation successfully, for he enabled Bagration to escape and thus brought about the initial failure of the campaign. The emperor had left the Prince of Ekhmul only a portion of his corps. As soon as the emperor understood the Russian movements and saw that Bagration's corps had been separated from the main army, he threw the prince against Bagration's army corps with the few troops left to him, a division and a half, but at the same time informed him that he was putting the King of Westphalia and his corps at his disposal.